All right, you guys, as you can see by the thumbnail, I'm back with another one like the other one. So check it out, you guys. Story time. I got another story for you. This one right here, a couple of you have been waiting on this story, and it's a story that I've been previewing for a couple of months. I've been telling you guys that I'm going to get it out, but I've been putting it on the back burner because there was some things I wanted to follow up about. So I did the follow up on the things that I wanted to make sure I had in the right context. So here you go. So anyways, without further ado, let me get into it so I can get on to the next story. But anyways, this story is about a rivalry between two street gangs, Santa Monica 13 and Venice 13. So according to my source, this rivalry has been in existence since the 1950s, and the intensity of the rivalry has accelerated over the decades. However, in 2009, these tensions escalated and the conflict led to a number of sporadic shootings, stabbings, and gang-related fights. Keep in mind that both of these gangs are considered to be multi-generational gangs, meaning that there's different generations that vary in age. And because of that, these confrontations transpired at Venice High School, Santa Monica High School, Santa Monica College, and on the streets. Basically, whenever and wherever they seen each other, it was on site. So one of the main individuals that was involved in this story was an individual by the name of Isaiah Lopez, who also went by Spooky. And he lived in the Pico Union District, an area that was considered to be territory that was dominated and claimed by Santa Monica 13. And this entire neighborhood is bounded by Olympic Boulevard to the north, Harbor Freeway to the east, Santa Monica Freeway to the south, and Normandy Avenue to the west. So one of the main things that makes Santa Monica 13 distinguishable from other Sureño gangs in that area is that Santa Monica 13 gang members wear black bandanas to represent themselves. And this is yet another gang from Southern California that has withstood the test of time. It originated back in the 1920s, and initially it was known as the Tomato Patch Gang. Why they refer to themselves as the Tomato Patch Gang, my research didn't extend that far. I don't know, maybe they like tomatoes, or maybe tomatoes were famous back in those days, or maybe it had something to do with tomatoes and spaghetti in the 1920s. I couldn't tell you. If somebody knows, share the knowledge and put it in the comments. But anyways, later on, after the birth of the Mexican Mafia in 1957, in an effort to demonstrate its loyalty to the Mexican Mafia as a staunch believer, it became known as Santa Monica 13. So again, 2009 was considered to be a tumultuous year for Santa Monica 13. Besides the escalating conflict that kicked off with Venice 13, it also became engaged in a turf war over uncontested territory with another one of its rivals, the Graveyard Gangster Crips. So for those of you that are familiar with that area, then you guys know that the Graveyard Gangster Crips claim control of the territory that's directly behind the Woodlawn Cemetery. So in 2009, several members of Santa Monica 13 also got wrapped up in a massive law enforcement operation called Operation Tombstone, a name that was obviously derived from the close proximity of the Woodlawn Cemetery, and also based on the fact that a lot of the crimes that were committed that were part of this operation were allegedly committed in that area. I'm not going to get into the details of that case. Maybe that's a story for another day. But this operation was primarily built off of wiretaps, recorded phone calls, intercepted text messages, audio and video recordings, and other forms of law enforcement digital media recordings. I talk about this happening practically every time I get into one of these stories about one of these law enforcement operations, and this case wasn't any different. So this case centered around a couple of homicides and narcotics activity that stemmed from an ongoing turf war. But several members of Santa Monica 13 were implicated and indicted, with about a dozen members of the Graveyard Gangster Crips. So according to my source, some of Santa Monica 13's other main rivals at that time were the Venice Shoreline Crips, Sotel 13, and the Culver City Boys. Anyways, at that time, Spooky was described as being one of Santa Monica 13's young, up-and-coming riders. He was one of those type of youngsters that didn't have a family. He was out there on the streets. He was always in his hood, representing. And he was one of the main instigators that fueled the conflict with Venice 13. Whenever he'd see anybody in that area that he didn't know or recognize, he would always jam them up and ask them if they were from Venice 13. He was personally involved in a lot of the transgressions that took place between these two neighborhoods. But on this particular day, September 30th, 2009, Spooky was riding his bike in an area that's close to his home in Santa Monica when he encountered two guys that were in a truck that later turned out to be stolen. And as soon as Spooky spotted these two individuals and they locked eyes, he knew instantly that these guys were out of bounds and they looked out of place in his neighborhood. Not just because he knew everybody in that area and he didn't recognize these guys, but when you've been out there in your neighborhood and you've been gangbanging for any period of time, you become familiar with all the different characteristics and warning signs that you might detect in rivals or other individuals who might be up to no good. The outward things that are easily discernible, like a car doing a slow roll in your neighborhood with a couple of individuals who look like gangbangers scanning the block. When you've been out there on the streets and you've been gangbanging, these are the kinds of things that you're gonna see. Things that the average person wouldn't look for or wouldn't see. Because unlike most cars that just push through the neighborhood, when you see a couple of individuals roll through like that, you can just tell that they're looking for trouble. They just have that look like they're up to no good. Either they're moving too slow, they got the headlights out, they're scanning the block too hard, or there's something about the eye contact that sends up a red flag. Sometimes it might even be something about the way someone's dressed on a blistering, hot-ass day. If it's 100 degrees outside and they're overdressed, that's gonna send up red flags. The same kind of things that you look for in prison. If it's hot and everybody comes out with their state issue blues on and they come out with them big ass heavy green jackets, beanies, gloves, you know something's about to kick off. It's the same shit. It's just a heightened sense of awareness that comes from being in these types of environments. That's all it is. You know, I can go on and on describing the different kind of characteristics and the warning signs, but if you've been out there on the streets, then you know what kinds of things to look for. So when Spooky first sees these two individuals in the truck, the first thing he makes a mental note of is that he doesn't recognize either one of them. The second thing that he noticed, which probably should have been the first, is that both of these individuals were wearing hoodies and they had their hoodies pulled up tightly around their heads. Oh, this was a dead giveaway because it was in the high 80s that day and it was just way too hot to be wearing a hoodie. So immediately the first thing that Spooky does is he crosses the street and he positions himself by some cars where he would have quick cover if these individuals try to get a drop on him. So as it turns out, these two individuals that were in this stolen truck, they were both from Venice 13. And their whole purpose for being in that neighborhood was because they were looking for rival gang members. They were looking for Santa Monica 13 gang members. The driver's name was Salvador de la Cruz, who went by the moniker Wormy. And the passenger's name was Douglas Cortez, who they called Little Stomper. So Spooky's intuition ended up being on the money, because as soon as he crossed the street and started pedaling towards an open carport, the passenger, Little Stomper, jumped out the truck, pointed a burner at Spooky, and got off 5 quick shots in rapid succession. So as soon as Spooky heard the first shot, he dropped his bike and he dove for cover. So again, as soon as Little Stomper started getting his shots off, Spooky hits the deck. And where he was at, he ended up being by the wheel of a parked car. At that vantage point, he was able to catch a glimpse of Little Stomper, and that's when he noticed that he also had on some black gloves. Now keep in mind that this all happened sometime around 3 p.m. in the late afternoon. So this all took place in broad daylight. So as soon as the shooting stopped, Spooky assumed he was good. He ducked and he got out of the way just in time. At least he thought so. But this is when he noticed that he was leaking, that he had been shot in the leg. It was a through and through bullet wound that wasn't life-threatening, but he didn't even feel the bullet when it passed through his leg. And this is due to the increased adrenaline levels that kick in when something like this happens. You become so distracted on the fight or flight mode that you're in, and you're so focused on what's happening that you don't even feel it until you start calming down. So there was another individual named Romeo Soto, who was also known as Sleepy. And Sleepy was an older member of Santa Monica 13 that was across the street when the shooting started. He was trimming trees in his front yard directly across the street when he was caught in the line of fire. As he was standing on a small step ladder, he caught a stray bullet to his left leg. And like Spooky, this also ended up being a through and through wound that wasn't considered to be life-threatening. You know, aside from that, later on, the investigators would find out that another stray bullet hit a parked car and the 2 remaining bullets entered an empty apartment but didn't cause any other injuries. So anyways, as soon as Little Stomper finished firing off those 5 shots, he jumped back in the truck and Wormy accelerated out of the area. But again, because this happened in broad daylight, several people looked out their windows as soon as they heard the shooting start. And at least 3 eyewitnesses got a good look at Little Stomper and Wormy both. In fact, one of the neighbors that had a clear vantage point of the back of the truck made a mental note of the license plate and quickly wrote it down on a piece of paper. Later on, this would end up being devastating for Little Stomper and Wormy both. But for the time being, they assumed that they had gotten away clean. Remember what I told you guys before in one of my other stories about cameras and how many times the average person gets caught on video throughout the course of an entire day? I believe it was somewhere around 70 something times. This can be from a combination of different cameras, security cameras, surveillance cameras, cell phone videos, or some other type of hidden device. Just always assume that there's a camera somewhere that has a vantage point of you and can see everything that you're doing. So as Wormy continued to accelerate away from the scene, he literally ended up crossing paths with the Santa Monica police sergeant named John Hudson. And this sergeant was responding to the shooting and was actually on his way to investigate when Wormy sped past him. So this sergeant, he obviously puts the call out that he sees this truck speed past him, and within minutes, they're on the Santa Monica freeway conducting a high-speed pursuit. So now it's all bad. Wormy and Little Stomper, they go into a panic. Little Stomper, he takes his hoodie off, he takes his gloves off, he puts the gun on his lap, ready to jump out. And now they know that the only chance that they have of getting away is to exit the freeway, to abandon the truck, and to take off in different directions. So Wormy exits the freeway near the Centinela Avenue off-ramp, and then they both bail out and take off running down Bundy Avenue. Initially, they had planned to split up. But when things get chaotic and you jump out in a clearing like that, the only thing you're thinking is to find somewhere to hide. So after scanning the area, unconsciously, they both probably just started running in the same direction. Needless to say, their plans changed. So they managed to get to a small woodland area and they hide behind some trees. And they actually managed to elude all these cops that were chasing them. I'm sure they probably even thought that they might have gotten away. But in situations like this, you guys already know what happens. It's never fair. It's always unfair. If it's at night, they're gonna put the ghetto bird on you. A ghetto bird that's equipped with heat-seeking technology that you're not gonna get away from. It doesn't matter where you hide, they're gonna find you. Even if it ain't at night, those ghetto birds are hard to shake, even in daylight. And that's because they have too broad of a vantage point to look down at. But when they don't put a ghetto bird on you, what do? What's the next best option? Or I think it's probably even worse than the ghetto bird. Those of you that have been in these situations, you should know. I know I do. They put a dog on you. And when they do that, you're cooked. Those dogs can somehow smell you from miles away when you're in fight or flight mode. Your sweat emits some type of chemical reaction or something that they can pick up on for miles. So that's what they do. They put the dogs on them. And at some point, Wormy and Little Stomper, they came to find out that they put the dogs on them. Somehow they found out. And at that point, that's when they split up. So Little Stomper was the first one that they found hiding by himself. He was hiding behind a water fountain when an officer by the name of Kono and his canine partner, Anton, found him. So according to the officer's claims, Little Stomper resisted their efforts to put him in handcuffs. So what do you think happened next? They let Anton gnaw on him for a few minutes until he finally let them put the cuffs on. You know, I tend to believe that he was gonna get chewed on like a piece of duck jerky, whether he resisted or not. He might not even have resisted, but whether he resisted or not, from my experience and from what I've seen before in the past, they let those dogs chew on you no matter what. I'm not saying that it happens all the time, but sometimes it does. And for Anton, it's good job security. I've been in those situations myself, and sometimes those officers that work with dogs, they get off on letting their dog gnaw on you for a few minutes, even if you're trying to cuff up, at least for a few minutes, until your shin looks like a slab of processed hamburger meat. So after Anton sunk his canines in a Little Stomper and gnawed on him for a few minutes, he ended up gnawing on Wormy's knee next. No, but seriously, according to the police reports, after Little Stomper and Wormy were both cuffed up and placed in the back of a squad car, they were then transported to Santa Monica PD. So once they got to the substation, they processed them and they attempted to interview him. And because this was considered to be a gang case, they didn't just take their mug shots. They took pictures of all their tattoos, even the ones that they didn't think were gang affiliated. So Little Stomper had a V for Venice under the right corner of his right eye. He had a dot on his left wrist and 3 dots on his right wrist, representing the number 13. He had Venice G's on his left arm and fuck Crash underneath it. I'm sure this is old news to a lot of you, but CRASH is an acronym that stands for Community Resources Against Street Hoodlums. Currently, it's known as the Gang Enforcement Detail, but there's still a lot of people that refer to it as CRASH. So a lot of people who were either victimized or knew other people who were victimized by this unit within LAPD's Rampart Division held clear animosity towards this unit, and this is obviously why Little Stomper had this tattoo. So some of the officers that were part of this unit were tied to Death Row Records and worked as personal security for Suge Knight and some of his artists. But some of these same officers were also accused of falsifying evidence, picking gang members up and then dumping them off in some of their known rivals' neighborhoods, as well as physically beating them up and pocketing money they had when they were arrested. You know, the Rampart Division became involved in an even bigger scandal when some of those same officers got caught for stealing evidence from the LAPD evidence room. As far as Wormy's tattoos, he had Venice 13 on the back of his neck with gangsters underneath it, and a skull wearing a full headdress, and a skull wearing a warrior's headdress with a V on it. So one of the arresting officers, an officer by the name of Gomez, claimed that he remembered conducting a field interview that he did on Wormy 2 years prior to this incident, and that Wormy was in the company of Little Stomper at that time. That same officer claimed that Wormy admitted to being a member of Venice 13 since he was little. So in 2009, when the conflict between Santa Monica 13 and Venice 13 started to escalate, the gang cops would go out and pay close attention to the graffiti that was struck up all over the walls in the neighborhood. You know, cops will go out and read graffiti for the purpose of trying to gauge who's going at it, what gang members are more active in the streets, and basically whatever else they can learn about their current activities. So one of the things that they noticed in 2009 is that there was a lot of graffiti that was struck up by Venice 13 gang members. And a lot of it was disrespecting Santa Monica 13 using derogatory terms. For example, they'd see Venice 13 followed by GS, that stood for the gangster clique. And then they'd also see SM with 187 under it. The SM would be crossed out to express disrespect towards Santa Monica 13. So the 187 is obviously the penal code for murder, which is meant to send a threatening message, indicative that they're Santa Monica 13 killers. Other graffiti that they've seen a lot was Venice Gang with Smack Killers written underneath it. Smack is a derogatory term used to identify or allude to Santa Monica 13 gang members. So although both the Santa Monica 13 and Venice 13 gangs are considered to be strong supporters of the Mexican mafias, an incident took place in Virginia Park a few months prior to this shooting that resulted in the entire Santa Monica 13 gang being green lighted by the Mexican mafia. In short order, this is what happened. Sometime in mid-2009, an annual car show was being held in a park called Virginia Park in Santa Monica. It's basically a lowrider show with all the vendors, the street food, people sitting on chairs in the park, and sometimes they'll have small name rappers or other artists who might perform at these events. For Santa Monica 13, this event is usually always dominated by the gang. They're out there everywhere in numbers, and for the most part, this is their territory. So they feel like this is their event and it's being thrown in their backyard. You know, you'll have other gang members from other gangs show up, but usually they'll keep a low profile. You'll find stragglers here and there, someone with their ladies, someone with their family, maybe one or two will show up, but again, they'll keep a low profile. So at this particular event, a Venice gang member and a prominent tax collector, who I'll refer to as Tips for the purpose of this story, also attended this event. And when I say tax collector, let's be clear, I'm not talking about the IRS. Tips was working directly under the Mexican mafia. So these guys, they were just out there trying to have a good time. Out there trying to talk to some of the women, eat some of the good food, listen to the music, enjoy the lowriders. They weren't out there on no bully type of shit. They were just trying to enjoy the event. However, at some point, several members of Santa Monica 13 pushed up on these two and words were exchanged. You know, it never actually got physical, but both Tibbs and this other guy from Venice 13 were verbally accosted and disrespected. So in an effort to cease the disrespect and to avoid this from getting out of control, Tibbs advised these guys from Santa Monica 13 that he was a representative of the big homies, that he worked directly with them, and that they might want to reconsider continuing to disrespect him like that. But these cats were turned up. They weren't trying to hear anything he was saying. Most of them had never even been to prison, so they didn't care about the big homies. Now, I don't know if they were drunk or if these guys were just youngsters and didn't know any better. But at any rate, like I said, this only exasperated the situation and the disrespect got worse. You know, Tibbs and this other guy from Venice, they weren't no slouches either, but they were clearly outnumbered and they were out of bounds, so they weren't being stupid either. Tibbs told his boy from Venice not to trip, that he was gonna let the big homies know how these guys were acting, and then he encouraged them to leave, and that's what they did. So later on that day, Tibbs reported what happened to his channel, and as a result, the entire Santa Monica 13 gang was green-lighted by the Mexican Mafia. You know, it would only last for a couple of months before the green light was rescinded and was taken off, but during that time, there were several Santa Monica 13 gang members that were shot. In fact, Victor Gallegos, Psycho from Santa Monica, who's a Mexican Mafia member, ended up playing a pivotal role in why the green light was rescinded. Now, I'm sure he spoke up since that was his neighborhood, and maybe he kept it contained to just those few individuals that were involved instead of it being the whole neighborhood. I don't know for sure one way or the other. I'm speculating, so don't quote me on that. But here's the other thing. During those few months while that green light was still in effect, and 5 days before Little Stomper and Wormy would end up getting arrested for this shooting, the Venice high school football team played the Santa Monica high school football team at Santa Monica College. During the game, a fight broke out where several Santa Monica 13 gang members jumped an individual who they thought was a Venice 13 gang member. So they jumped this guy and they ended up stabbing him 4 times in the stomach. And this became known as the football game stabbing. So they were in hot water for those 2 incidents that were again referred to as the Virginia Park incident and the football stabbing incident. Anyways, I'm not sure if Spooky caught any flack behind the statements that he made, but if I was gonna make an educational guess, I'd probably say that he did. Because after he was shot, he was interviewed at the hospital by 2 investigators from the Santa Monica Police Department. Spooky told the police that he was shot by 2 individuals in a truck that were both wearing hoodies. He didn't say much beyond that other than he was gonna deal with it himself. But when Little Stomper was arrested and was found hiding behind that water fountain, he was wearing a short sleeve white t-shirt. But later that same day, after the officers canvassed the general area where Little Stomper and Wormy were hiding, they also found gloves and a hoodie that had been discarded on Bundy Avenue. So this ended up hurting Little Stomper at trial, which probably means that Spooky was done. Sleepy, the other guy who was shot when Spooky was shot, also made statements. In fact, he even took it a step further and testified as a prosecution witness at their trial. The Good Samaritans, who ended up remembering the license plate number and who witnessed the truck pull up on the street before the shooting started, testified at the trial as well. In the end, both Little Stomper and Wormy were both convicted for the attempted, willful, deliberate, and premeditated murders of both Spooky and Sleepy. They ended up stacking the charges on these guys and they wiped them out. They had 5 serious felony counts with gang enhancements attached to each one. They also hit these guys with predicate offenses, basically serious crimes that other Venice 13 gang members had been convicted of in the past to show a pattern of gang activity. Now, Little Stomper actually had a good attorney that put on a decent defense for him. He was almost successful in getting the gloves and the hoodie thrown out that they found on Bundy Avenue, based on the fact that it had at least 5 different DNA profiles on it. But even though the judge made it seem like he was gonna dump it, he switched up and did the 41 fake at the last minute. You know, a lot of the times when you have these kinds of big cases, judges don't have balls big enough to dump tainted evidence like this, even though it would have been justified. Instead, they just rather let the appeals court deal with it. So that's what he did. Coincidentally, the appeals court did actually modify these guys' sentences later on. Their sentences were modified based on sentencing errors that were incorrectly articulated. But unfortunately for Stomper, they didn't modify the judge's ruling with regards to the hoodie and the gloves. But damn, 5 different profiles? I don't even know what to think about that. Anyways, both Little Stomper and Wormy were given life sentences. So currently, Little Stomper is in High Desert State Prison, and Wormy is housed at Kern Valley State Prison. The other thing that might work in these guys' favor is that they committed these crimes when they were under the age of 26. This makes them eligible for parole, either after their 15th, 20th, or 25th year of incarceration. It's just dependent on how the judge imposed their sentences. So there you have it, 2 more young lives that were wasted behind being misguided and misled, brainwashed into believing that they were on the righteous path and that they were fighting the good fight. You know, honestly, I hope something works out for them and that someday they come to realize that there's more to life than the one they were glorifying. Anyways, I hope you guys have enjoyed this episode of Paradigm Profiles. If you guys like this episode, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like this episode, give it a thumbs down. But either way, drop a comment and let me know what you think. As always, I just want to thank those of you who continue to show your unwavering support and for also continuing to tap into the channel. Until the next one, you guys continue pushing that positivity and enjoy the rest of your week. With that said, this is your boy B, and I'm gone.